This is a new section, and we're really getting into the exciting stuff now. After these few videos, particularly in this section and in the next section, our programs are going to be able to save their status so that we can continue later. By the way, just as an advance, in the next section we'll look at databases. Cool stuff. For example, we could write a program to store the books we want to read, and they won't be forgotten when the program ends and we start it again. That way we can really start developing larger applications now that, the information they hold starts to persist across runtimes. From this section onwards, we're going to be focusing more on building apps as opposed to just learning about concepts, which is really useful. You have to know what you're typing before you start typing it. But the best thing to do is to actually write code, of course, and develop some apps. So I'd like to apologize if you have been bored over the last few sections just learning, how to do things with Python. Now we're going to build apps and things are going to get more exciting, I promise you. And also, we're going to be writing all our code on PyCharm, as we've been doing. Instead of REPL-IT, we're going to start forgetting about REPL-IT as we focus more on these larger apps. In REPL-IT, you can't interact with files and databases and other good stuff, so that's why we must stop using it now. If you want to ask any questions about particular pieces of code, you can still post your code on REPL-IT and I'll definitely be able to look at it easily. I've created a new project here. I've called it files_project, and I've created an app.py file. Because in this video we're going to be dealing with files, particularly text files, I'm also going to right-click and create a new good old normal file, and I'm going to call it data.txt. The .txt stands for .text, and this data is going to hold some text data. Now let's talk about how we can read the contents of this data file using Python. Of course, right now it's empty, but we're going to type the name of our friend, Rolf. Just as an example, we're going to read the data in and print it out, just so you know how easy it is with Python to read some data out of a file. It's really straightforward. All we have to do is open the file, for which we have to give it the name of the file, that's data.txt. And you can see here you've got a nice thing in PyCharm where it tells you the arguments of this file. There's a lot. There's a mode, there's a buffering, encoding, errors, and so forth. We're only going to do R. R is going to be the mode. Data.txt is going to be the name of the file. And the R stands for reading. We're going to open a file for reading only. Of course, this opens the file, and that does something at the operating system level. The operating system now has stored somewhere in its memory that you have this file open. And there's a certain limit to the number of files you can have open at once. Now, other than the operating system knowing that this file is now open, we must also have a way to interact with the file, for which we have to, of course, store this object that gets returned, it's called a file pointer, into a variable. Now that we have it on a variable, we can do things like create a new variable, which is myfile.read. .read is going to read the entire contents of the file as a single string and give it us as file content. Now, I said earlier that there is a limit to how many files you can have simultaneously open in your computer at once. I'm not lying, so the first thing is to make sure you close the file, myfile.close. That returns that file opener to the operating system, and now that file is closed. If you wanted to read it again or interact with it in any other way, you would not be able to do so. However, we've already extracted what we wanted from it, that's the whole contents, and we can print them out. So that's it. That's really as simple as it gets. Let's right-click app.py and run it. And notice how now we get Rolf. Also, as a side thing, I've increased the font size of this command line, just for your benefit. So the file contents is now one long string, and when we call the .read method of the file, it just goes through the entire file and gives us all of its contents as a single string. If the file is really, really long, and some of them can be tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of lines long, you could have a problem if you decide to do this. So we will learn other ways of going about it later on. And also remember, it's really important to close the file when we finish. Otherwise, Python thinks we still need to keep it open, and it can cause problems when the file contents change. It can cause problems with having too many open at the same time as well. Now let's move on to writing to the file. I mean, reading it is fairly straightforward. Just open it on reading mode, that's important. Then you read it, then you close it, and you have the content available. Now let's write to it. After we've closed the file, that's important, we can reopen it this time for writing. So I'm going to create a my file writing variable, and that's going to be data.txt, but this time W for writing. Notice, by the way, that when we open a file for writing, that erases the contents of the file, and anything we write will overwrite anything that's already there. So if you want to keep the contents of your file, do not open it in W mode. There are other ways that you can use, other modes, that won't erase the data there, and instead it will keep the data there and let you edit it. Editing files, not so easy though. That's slightly more work. So now we've got the file open for writing, we can write something. We can potentially write the user's name so that we will remember it from one time we run the program to another. Where should we ask the user for their name? Should we ask for their name after we open the file or before we open the file? The answer is before we open the file. You don't want to have your files open for any longer than possible, and let's remember, if we have an input here, the user may never type anything. Potentially, they could just run the program and then forget about it. And then you'd have this data.txt file open, potentially for a long time. You don't want to do that. So the best thing to do is to make sure that your files are open for the smallest period of time possible. And that's almost always in a few lines of code where you're not asking the user to do anything. So just open them and close them as quickly as you can. We've asked the user for their name, then we've opened the file for writing, and now, of course, we can do myfile.writing, myfile.writing, and then dot. And when you do that in PyCharm, by the way, you get all of the methods and properties of the object. Remember that dot means inside. So here we're looking inside the object to see what we can use. And this is really great from PyCharm, and it lets us look at potentially what we want to call. Sorry, I was reading close there, and I was like, what do we want to close? We don't want to close anything just yet. But nonetheless, you can see the close method is here. We're going to be calling that in just a moment. So going through this, there's a lot of stuff. There is things that you may not understand what they mean, like readable, readline, readlines, seek. And whenever you encounter something like this that you are interested in, but you don't know what it means, Google it. It's really great. The Python documentation, the official Python guides, they can be a bit dense, but they have a lot of information about how to use all these built-in functions like file wrappers, and also information on what these things mean. But of course, we're going to go and call the write method. And the write method takes in a string that we're going to write to the file. And that's going to be the user's name. Finally, of course, we must close the file. That's very important. Don't forget to do that. So now, when we run our program, the first thing we're going to do is open our file for reading, print out the contents, then we're going to ask the user for their name, and then we're going to open the file for writing and write their name to the file. So if we run the file once, if we run our program once, we see Rolf, that's the current contents of the file, then we can type in our name, and then the program finishes. We can run it again, and now we see that our name has appeared there, which is fantastic. It means that the file does know what's going on. If you look at the file, you can see indeed that Jose is currently in the file contents. Then I'm going to type Rolf, press enter, and if we go back to data.txt, we see that Rolf is now in there. Over the next few videos, we're going to look at storing more than just a single string in the file. or rather a single value in the file, by looking at CSV files, comma separated value files, JSON files, JavaScript object notation files, and also how we can do things like imports and things like that to make dealing with files easier. Also remember, we never told the file to delete the contents, but as I said earlier, the W mode overwrites everything that's in the file. So if you open your files with W mode, they get deleted. Whatever you write becomes the new content. Be careful with that. It's a dangerous operation. Use it carefully. That's it for this video. I just wanted to show you the syntax for opening a new file and two of the modes, R and W. There's quite a few more modes, and in the further reading section, lecture of this section, I'm going to include a link to a couple more of the modes so that you can experiment with